Ethan had never imagined that a single night could rearrange the entire geometry of his life, but as he guided his drunk CEO through the dim lobby of her penthouse building, he felt something shifting, quietly, like a fault line deciding whether to break. He wasn't a hero, not even close. He was just a single father who measured his days in lunchboxes, late-night coding tasks, and the soft breathing of his daughter as she slept. He only agreed to drive Vivian Hale home because no one else stepped forward, and because he had the sort of heart that responded instinctively to people in distress. But the moment she leaned her forehead against the car window and whispered things she would never say sober, things about loneliness, pressure, betrayal, Ethan sensed that he had crossed into a story he was never meant to be part of. By the time he draped his shirt over her shoulders and left her safely asleep, he felt certain the world would forget this kindness by morning. Instead, dawn would drag him into the center of a storm he could never have prepared for. A CEO in his shirt, a board meeting watching him live, and a truth so unexpected it would silence an entire company. Ethan woke before the sun did, well before the world shook off its thin layer of silence, and for the first few minutes he forgot everything about last night, the rooftop party, the spilled champagne, the uneasy laughter of executives desperate to impress each other, and the way Vivian Hale, the woman whose name could make an entire department fix its posture, had sagged against him like a person collapsing under the weight of everything she never allowed anyone to see. His alarm buzzed with an insistence that belonged to normal days. Pack Lily's lunch, send the email draft to it, double-check the grocery list. For a brief, blessed moment, he believed this morning would behave like all others. But memory returned slowly, like film developing in chemical trays. Her blurred smile in the elevator, the fragile way she had reached for his wrist, and the quiet request that he still didn't know how to interpret. "Can I borrow your shirt?" He didn't question her. He simply gave it, because when someone is unraveling at the seams, you don't ask them to explain their shape. Now, as sunlight crept through his blinds and warmed the corner of Lily's toys scattered across the living room, he felt the faint tug of dread. Last night wasn't something you could fold away neatly. The CEO of Hale Systems had slept in his shirt. The words alone sounded absurd, like the kind of rumor that mutated as it traveled through office hallways. He rubbed his face, exhaling sharply, and forced himself into motion. Lily appeared in the kitchen, her hair a nest of sleepy curls, dragging her unicorn blanket behind her like a cape. "Daddy, you came home late," she said, small but perceptive in the way children often are. Ethan smiled, lifting her onto a chair. "Work thing," he said, keeping his voice light. "Someone needed a ride home." She accepted that, swinging her feet, humming a tune from a cartoon she loved, and he let himself breathe again, grateful for her uncomplicated world. Breakfast was mundane, burnt toast on the first attempt, cereal on the second, but mundanity was a relief. It grounded him. After dropping Lily at school, he sat in his car for a moment longer than necessary. The engine ticked softly, the neighborhood buzzed with morning traffic, and he stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He didn't look like the kind of man who belonged in the orbit of someone like Vivian Hale. He looked like a father who tried his best. And yet, last night had dragged him squarely into her orbit anyway. After a few minutes, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. His stomach tightened before he answered. "Ethan?" The voice was soft, hoarse at the edges. "Vivian." His grip tightened around the steering wheel. "Good morning, Ms. Hale. Are you feeling all right?" A pause, then a gentle laugh, one that seemed to surprise even her. "I woke up wearing your shirt," she said quietly, "and I don't remember putting it on." Heat rose to Ethan's cheeks even though no one could see him. He cleared his throat. "You asked for it. You looked cold. I didn't think—" "You did the right thing," she interrupted. "You always do the right thing." The line went quiet again. He could hear her breathing, faint but uneven. She wasn't calling to accuse him of anything. He could sense that instantly. She sounded embarrassed. Human, even. Vivian Hale had always been a sculpture of composure, the kind of woman who walked into rooms like she owned the architecture. But right now she sounded like someone staring at the pieces of themselves, scattered across a luxurious penthouse floor. "I wanted to thank you," she said quieter, "for not leaving me alone, for caring." Ethan swallowed, unprepared for the vulnerability threaded through her words. Anyone would have, he answered, though he wasn't sure it was true. People didn't usually step forward when the powerful faltered. They watched, they whispered, they kept their distance. Vivian exhaled, murmuring something he couldn't quite catch, then added, "Before you come into work, I need to explain something. Last night wasn't accidental, not entirely." His brows pulled together. "What do you mean?" "Just come by my office when you arrive," she said, and the call ended as abruptly as it began. Ethan stared at his phone, confusion and unease unfurling in him like slow smoke. He didn't like mysteries. He didn't like being pulled into situations he didn't understand. He especially didn't like the possibility that someone might twist a good deed into something ruinous. At the office, chatter filled the lobby, bright, echoing, and harmless. People greeted him with their usual distracted nods. No one looked at him strangely. No rumors circulated. Relief washed over him, fragile but real. Maybe he had been imagining the worst. Maybe last night truly belonged only to the dark, never to be dissected under fluorescent lights. But the elevator ride to the executive floor stole that hope. Two board members stood inside, mid-conversation. They didn't notice Ethan at first. "You heard what security reported?" one whispered. "She didn't come home alone." "Well, it was bound to happen. She's been slipping for weeks. Pressure like that cracks anyone. Still, if the press gets even a whiff." The second man finally noticed Ethan and went stiff, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Ethan felt the atmosphere shift. Something cold and heavy slipped into the space between them. The next floor dinged mercifully, and they stepped out without another word. Ethan remained still, pulse thudding. They didn't know it was him, but they knew someone had been with her. And in the absence of clarity, rumors bred like wildfire. By the time he reached Vivian's office door, his breath felt tight in his chest. He knocked lightly. "Come in," came her voice. He stepped inside and froze. She stood by the window wearing his shirt. The same blue cotton, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, fabric soft and oversized against her frame. She looked like a person who had rummaged through the ruins of her life and chosen one piece that brought her comfort. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and instead of shame, there was serenity, as if she had made a decision long before he walked in. "I kept it," she said simply, fingers brushing the hem. "I thought you might want it back, but then I realized," she hesitated, "I'm not ready to give it back yet." Ethan couldn't speak. His throat constricted. She stepped closer, expression unreadable but not cold, not aloof, more like she was allowing herself to be seen without armor for the first time. "Last night," she continued, voice steadying, "I didn't drink because I wanted to. I drank because the board cornered me with something I wasn't prepared to face, something they've been hiding. And I said things to you that I never intended to say to anyone." He took a breath. "You don't owe me an explanation." "But I do," she insisted softly. "Because what I said and what I did, they weren't accidents. I reached for you because you were the only person in that entire company who sees me without wanting something from me." Her voice cracked, just barely. She looked away, gathering herself. "You think last night was a coincidence?" she said. "But it wasn't. I've trusted you for a long time, more than I should, more than is appropriate." Ethan felt something shift inside him. Confusion, empathy, disbelief, all tangled. "Vivian," he whispered, but she pressed on. "The board is meeting in 10 minutes, she said, "and they're expecting me to explain where I was, who I was with, and why." His blood turned cold. "You didn't tell them." "I told them the truth," she interrupted, "that a good man helped me when I couldn't help myself, and if they want to twist that, they can try." The intercom beeped suddenly. "Ms. Hale," the assistant's voice crackled, "the board is waiting. Should I connect your live feed?" Vivian didn't look away from Ethan. "Yes," she said. "Send it through." His heartbeat thundered. "Wait, live feed? I shouldn't be here." But the screen on the wall flickered on, revealing every board member in a grid of cold faces. And in that split second before any of them spoke, before accusations or insinuations could ignite, Vivian Hale stepped slightly aside so the camera captured Ethan fully, clearly, undeniably, standing in her office while she wore his shirt, and the entire company went silent. The moment the faces of the board filled the screen, Ethan felt the room shrink around him, as if the walls were inhaling and he was caught somewhere in the tightening space. A dozen pairs of eyes locked onto him, some widening with confusion, others narrowing with the hunger of people who sense scandal before it even formed. His breath clipped short, but Vivian stood rooted beside him, steady in a way he had never seen her, calm, almost defiant, the soft cotton of his shirt draping her like a declaration she had already made peace with. "Good morning," she said, her tone cool and controlled, as though nothing about the situation was unusual. A few board members murmured greetings, while others exchanged glances like vultures signaling over a carcass. Finally, the chairman, Gregory Marsh, leaned forward. "Vivian," he said, voice dripping with that condescending gentleness senior executives reserved for moments just before betrayal. "We were expecting a private explanation." Vivian crossed her arms loosely. "You're getting one." Marsh's gaze flickered to Ethan. "And why is an employee present during this?" "Because he was there last night," she replied simply. "And I won't retell the narrative of my own life as if it were a crime scene." Marsh paused, irritated. "Very well, then perhaps you can explain why security reported you entering your home with someone." "They didn't report it," she corrected. "They asked if I was safe, and I told them yes because Ethan ensured I got home safely." A few whispers erupted on the call. "Ms. Hale," another board member, Mrs. Ashton, spoke sharply, her voice brittle with judgment. "Do you realize how this looks? You intoxicated. An employee escorting you home, wearing his clothing the next morning." Ethan stiffened, but Vivian's posture didn't waver. "What I realize," she said, "is that you're more concerned about optics than the well-being of your own CEO." "This isn't about well-being," Ashton snapped. "This is about responsibility, about professionalism, about control." Vivian interrupted softly, and for the first time, the screenful of powerful people stumbled into silence. She stepped forward, the morning light glinting faintly against her hair. "Let me clarify this so none of you waste time constructing a dramatized version for your private gossip." She took a breath, not shaky but measured, as though she had spent all night preparing for this exact collision. "I drank too much because one of you," her eyes swept the grid of faces, "decided to leak internal projections to competitors, compromising our financial strategies for next quarter." A ripple of shock crackled across the call. Ethan blinked, blindsided. That wasn't what he expected. He had anticipated some confession about vulnerability, exhaustion, loneliness, not corporate sabotage. Vivian continued, her voice low but razor sharp. "I discovered it shortly before the event last night. Instead of addressing it rationally, I let the weight of betrayal push me into a panic attack. Ethan noticed something was wrong and stepped in when no one else did. He drove me home. He made sure I was safe. And when I got cold, he gave me his shirt." Her fingers brushed the fabric again, not self-consciously but almost protectively. "If you think that act of kindness compromises my professionalism," she said, "then perhaps you should re-examine your definition of leadership." A chilling quiet settled. The chairman cleared his throat. "Vivian, accusations of leaks are extremely serious. If you—" "I'm not speculating," she cut in. "I have evidence, and when I present it, the media will pay much more attention to that than to the fact that an employee displayed basic humanity." Ethan watched everything unfold as though he were standing outside his own body, witnessing a moment he had no right to be part of. He wasn't used to conflicts like these. Politics, power struggles, high-stakes tension. He was a single father who went to work, did his job, paid his bills, and kept his head down. Yet somehow he had become the gravitational center of a corporate storm. One board member, Mr. Kavanaugh, leaned forward. "Ms. Hale, with all due respect, we're not questioning the employee's humanity. We're questioning the intimacy of the situation." Ethan flinched, but Vivian's eyes darkened. "There was no intimacy," she said flatly. "There was safety. There was clarity. There was a man doing what every person should do when they see someone in distress: help." Kavanaugh's cup and his lips tightened. "The public may not see it that way." "Then I will explain it myself," she countered, "and I will not allow any of you to shape the narrative in ways that suit your political agendas." Watching her defend him, defend both of them, felt surreal. He wasn't accustomed to anyone stepping between him and danger. He did that for Lily, for coworkers who needed help with difficult code, for neighbors who locked themselves out, but no one had ever done it for him. Vivian took another step forward. Ethan will not face disciplinary action. There will be no smear campaigns, no whispered rumors, no punishment for rescuing his boss. Her jaw tightened faintly. And if anyone attempts to weaponize this incident against him, they will deal with me directly. The board stared, caught between reluctance and fear, power and uncertainty. Marsh finally raised a hand. Very well, for now, we will table the matter until your evidence regarding the leak is submitted for review. You'll have it by noon, she replied. Good day. And she ended the call. The screen snapped black, returning the office to its quiet, sunlit stillness. Ethan exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, his knees nearly giving out beneath him. Vivian turned toward him slowly, and the shift in her expression, softening from icy steel to vulnerable humanity, nearly undid him. I'm sorry you were dragged into that, she said softly. He shook his head, voice rough. You didn't drag me. I was already in it the moment I drove you home. She laughed faintly. I suppose that's true. A moment passed between them, not romantic, not charged with unspoken desire, but raw, fragile understanding. Two people standing in the aftermath of a storm neither asked for. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, searching for words. You didn't have to defend me like that. Vivian looked at him with an intensity that seemed to peel back every defense he had ever built. Yes, she said, I did. And with that, she walked past him and sank into the chair behind her desk, exhaustion settling into her shoulders. For the first time, he noticed how pale she looked, how tight her breathing had become, how the shadows under her eyes hinted at a sleepless night. Are you all right? He asked, stepping closer. She stared at the surface of her desk, voice soft. No. She wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't the CEO now, just a woman sitting beneath the crushing weight of secrets she no longer wanted to carry alone. Vivian, he said gently, what really happened last night, before I found you? Her fingers curled slowly against the desk. When she spoke, her voice trembled just enough to betray the truth she had tried to swallow. They threatened me, she whispered. Ethan's heart plummeted. Who? 3 board members, she said. They cornered me in a private room, told me if I didn't step down quietly after the leak becomes public, they'd make sure the narrative destroyed me. Ethan froze, fury blooming in his chest. They can't do that. They can, she said emptily. In our world, truth doesn't matter. Perception does. She lifted her gaze to him, tears glassing her eyes but not falling. I drank because I felt trapped. I reached for you because I didn't know who else to trust. His breath caught. She wasn't exaggerating. He could feel the sincerity rolling off her like heat. Vivian, he said quietly, you don't have to go through this alone. She stared at him as if trying to decipher whether he meant it or whether he was like the others, kind only when it benefited them. Then, why, she whispered, why do you care so much? Because you're human, he said. Because you were hurting. Because, he swallowed, searching for honesty. Because no one should face the world the way you have to. She blinked slowly, tears threatening again. Not dramatic tears. Not the kind designed to elicit sympathy. The kind that appeared only when someone finally let themselves be seen. I don't know how to trust people, she whispered. I never have. Then start with me, he said. Something in her expression cracked, quiet, barely visible, but real. I don't know what's going to happen next, she breathed. With the leak, with the board, with everything. Ethan stepped closer, not touching her, but anchoring himself beside her like a steady force. Then we take it one step at a time. Vivian looked at him as though the world had been holding her underwater and he had just offered her air. But before she could respond, her office phone buzzed sharply on the desk. She flinched. Ethan's jaw tensed. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Yes? A pause. Her face went still, then colder than ice. Send them in, she said. She hung up and looked at Ethan. They're here. Who? He asked. And then he heard footsteps outside the door, heavy, determined, threatening. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. The board members who threatened me, and the door handle began to turn. Vivian didn't appear in Ethan's life the same way other executives did, through emails, directives, or clipped instructions delivered at the end of a meeting. Instead, she slipped into it quietly, almost unintentionally, as though the night he drove her home had opened a door neither of them knew existed. In the days that followed, her presence hovered at the edge of his routines, shaping them in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It began with a message early one morning. Board meeting at 9. Bring the predictive model. Also, bring coffee, please, the strong kind. It was the please that stunned him. CEOs didn't say please to software engineers, not unless they were trying to soften something or hide something. When Ethan arrived at the office, she was already there, leaning against the glass wall of the conference room, dressed sharply but with an expression that betrayed exhaustion. Her eyes met his in a fleeting glance that carried too many layers at once. Gratitude, embarrassment, curiosity, something like relief. The board members took their seats while Vivian launched into a briefing delivered with uncharacteristic restraint. She wasn't the fiery, razor-edged CEO he knew. She was more grounded, almost fragile, as though part of her was still standing barefoot in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, whispering truths she had tried to bury. Ethan kept his distance, reminding himself that whatever had happened between them was temporary, accidental, a moment suspended outside reality. But reality had a strange way of bending around the things people ignored. Throughout the meeting, she kept directing questions to him, technical questions, strategic questions, questions that made it impossible for him to remain invisible. He had never seen her behave this way toward anyone, let alone toward him. The board noticed. People exchanged glances, a few raised eyebrows, and when the meeting ended, Vivian pulled Ethan aside with the subtle authority of someone used to getting what she wanted. "Walk with me," she said, leading him toward the stairwell instead of the elevator. The stairwell was quiet, echoing slightly with each step. She paused midway between floors and leaned against the cold metal railing, exhaling slowly. "I owe you an apology," she said. Ethan blinked, unsure how to process a CEO apologizing to him twice in the span of 2 days. "For what?" he asked. She hesitated, as though she wasn't sure how much truth she was willing to release. "For dragging you into things you shouldn't be involved in, for the board call yesterday, for—" She stopped, searching for something. "For making you feel cornered." Ethan leaned against the wall across from her, arms crossed loosely. "I wasn't cornered. Just confused." "I know," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "The truth is, I wasn't supposed to drink that night. I wasn't supposed to lose control. But something happened at the investor dinner, something I'm not ready to talk about yet." Ethan didn't press her. He simply waited, steady and patient. It must have been this quiet in his posture that loosened her guard, because she added softly, "You were the only person who looked at me that night and didn't want something." The weight of her words settled between them, warm and fragile. Ethan didn't respond. Not out of discomfort, but because he sensed that anything he said might tip the balance of this strange, delicate connection forming between them. Vivian drew a slow breath and straightened. "I need your help," she said. "Not personally, professionally. The company is in trouble. The investors want to replace me. And after everything that happened last night, the board thinks you're involved." Ethan nearly laughed. "Involved how?" She swallowed. "They think you know something. They think you were with me for reasons other than driving me home." Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to keep his voice steady. "Okay, that's ridiculous." "It is," she agreed, "but that doesn't stop them from using it." For a moment, the stairwell felt like the only safe place they could speak without a dozen watchful eyes dissecting every syllable. Ethan wanted to walk away, to protect the cocoon he had built around his daughter and his life, but something anchored him. Maybe it was the vulnerability she tried desperately to hide, or the memory of her leaning against the car window confessing truths in a trembling whisper, or the way she stood now, powerful yet afraid, determined yet breaking. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Vivian's gaze lifted, sharp and clear. "I need you to stay close, not to me personally," she clarified quickly, though her voice wavered. "To the project, to the model, to the data workflows. The investors trust the numbers more than they trust me, and the numbers come from your team. Ethan hesitated. So you want me to be some kind of shield? No, she said firmly. I want you to be the person who keeps the truth intact. There it was again, the truth. The truth she kept circling but never touching. He studied her for a long moment before responding. Vivian, I don't know what happened that night, and I don't need to. But if you're asking me to help protect the integrity of the work, I can do that. Her shoulders relaxed in a way that seemed almost involuntary. Thank you, she whispered, and the softness of it startled them both. She turned away quickly, pushing the stairwell door open. Ethan followed her back into the hum of the office, where whispers drifted like static around them. Every step they took together felt like a headline waiting to be misinterpreted. Over the next week, their interactions grew frequent, not intimate, but undeniable. Vivian asked for updates on the model. She forwarded him internal data. She sat beside him during late-night debugging sessions, her presence calm yet charged with something unspoken. Employees noticed. Rumors bloomed like wildfire. Someone joked that he had become the CEO's favorite. Another commented that Vivian's tone softened only when addressing him. Ethan tried to ignore them, but the attention weighed on him like a constant pressure behind his ribs. The worst moment came during a lunch break when two senior developers approached him with that smug mix of curiosity and mischief. So, one said, leaning on the table, you and Vivian, should we congratulate you? Ethan froze mid-bite. There's nothing to congratulate, he said flatly. We work together, that's all. The two men exchanged a knowing look. Sure, one of them said, but the board's been watching you. Hell, the whole company is. Word is, whatever happened that night must have been wild. He didn't rise to the bait. He simply packed his lunch and left the room. But their voices followed him like gnats. Singledad scores a CEO? Man, that takes talent. When he reached the hallway, Vivian was standing at the end of it, holding a folder. And though she pretended not to hear, something in her posture tightened. Later that evening, she appeared at his desk long after most employees had left. She set the folder down and lowered her voice. I'm sorry, she whispered. This is my fault. It's not, Ethan said. People talk. They'll get bored eventually. No, she insisted. They won't, not until this ends, and I don't know how to end it without making things worse. He looked at her, really looked, and realized that she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for him. That realization cracked something inside him. Before he could speak, her phone buzzed, an unknown number. The color drained from her face. She whispered, It's them. Ethan watched as she stepped into an empty meeting room to take the call. Her voice faded behind the glass, urgent, trembling, defiant. When she emerged minutes later, she looked as though her world had tilted. They know, she said, barely breathing. Know what? Ethan asked. Vivian met his eyes with a truth she could no longer hide. What really happened that night? The ground beneath him seemed to shift. But before he could ask, she added, We don't have much time. Part 4. I'll tell you everything. Vivian stood in the dim hallway with her hands trembling slightly, and Ethan had never seen her look so stripped of power, so human, so unbearably fragile beneath the armor she normally wore like a second skin. She drew a slow, unsteady breath, as though preparing to peel back a truth she had been holding together with sheer force. Ethan, she whispered, eyes fixed on the floor. That night at the investor dinner, I wasn't just drinking. I was drugged. The words hit him like a sudden drop in altitude, stealing the air from his lungs. He stepped closer without meaning to, instinct overriding caution. By who? He asked, voice low. Vivian shook her head. One of the investors, someone influential, someone who's been trying to force a merger behind my back. The drug didn't take full effect, but it was enough to disorient me, enough to make me vulnerable, enough that I couldn't fight my way out without help. She finally looked up at him, and her voice broke. You were the only person who saw something was wrong. Ethan's chest tightened. But I didn't know. You didn't have to know, she said softly. You got me out of there. You put me in your car. You kept asking if I could hear you, if I could stay awake. And when I started losing control, you gave me your shirt because I was freezing. You stayed with me until I stopped shaking. Ethan, If you hadn't come back for me, I don't know what would have happened." The memory flooded back, the way she pressed her forehead to the window, the way her voice quivered when she told him she felt wrong, like her body wasn't listening to her. He had assumed it was just alcohol, exhaustion, emotional overload. He had never imagined this. "Vivian, why didn't you tell the board?" he asked. A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Because they're the ones who set up the dinner. Because they would rather replace me quietly than deal with a scandal. Because the investor behind this owns enough shares to sway decisions if I push back. And because if I reported it without evidence, they would paint me as hysterical, incompetent, unstable, exactly what they need to justify pushing me out." Ethan felt heat rising beneath his skin, a sharp, protective anger he hadn't known he was capable of. "So what do they think now?" he asked. Her voice dropped. "They think you're the leverage. They think you saw something, and that call I just took, it was a warning. They want you gone, silenced. They said if you resign quietly, nothing else will spread." Ethan stared at her, incredulous. "Spread? What? Rumors about us, was it? Estás casé?" "About me," Ishad whispered. "About my career, my credibility, my leadership, and you. They'll twist what happened that night into something ugly if they have to." For a moment the hallway felt too small, too quiet, too dangerous. Then Vivian stepped closer, close enough that he could hear the uneven rhythm of her breath. "I didn't want you pulled into this. I thought I could protect you, but it's too late." He shook his head. "No, it's not too late for anything." "Ethan," she said, voice cracking, "you have a daughter. You can't risk—" "I'm not risking anything," he cut in gently. "I'm choosing something." Vivian blinked as though the meaning of his words disarmed her. He continued, voice steady. "You told me once that I was the only person who didn't want something from you. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because it was wrong, what they did, what they're still doing, and because no one deserves to go through that alone." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time since he'd known her, she didn't hide the emotion behind them. "So what do we do?" she whispered. "We tell the truth," Ethan said. "No," she said quickly. "Without evidence, they'll bury us both. They'll frame it as misconduct, spin the narrative, ruin you just to make the story cleaner." "Then we don't go through them," he said. "We go around them." She inhaled sharply. "Meaning?" Ethan straightened, the clarity of his plan forming as he spoke. "The board has been pushing for transparency on the predictive model. They scheduled a live stream update with the company. They can't cancel it without raising suspicion. If you tell the truth there, publicly, they can't bury it, not without burying themselves." Vivian froze. "Ethan, they will try to destroy me." "They already are," he replied. "This way, you get to fight back." She looked at him for a long moment, conflict and courage battling behind her eyes. "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "What will this do to your life?" "My daughter will grow up knowing her father did the right thing," he said. "That's enough." Something inside Vivian seemed to break and rebuild in the same breath. She nodded slowly. "Then we do it." The next morning, the live stream began. Thousands of employees tuned in. Investors, partners, journalists. The board sat around the table like statues carved from arrogance and fear. Ethan stood near the edge of the frame, laptop in hand, outwardly calm but with adrenaline humming through his blood. Vivian took her seat at the head of the table, poised, composed, but fiercer than he had ever seen her. The chairman began. "Ms. Hale will now present the quarterly—" "Actually," she cut in, voice steady, "I'll be presenting something else today." The board stiffened. The chairman's smile faltered. But Vivian continued, looking directly into the camera. "1 week ago, at an investor dinner arranged by this board, I was drugged." Gasps erupted across the live stream chat window. The board members began to murmur urgently, shifting in their seats. She pressed on. "I was removed from the venue by an employee who noticed I was in danger. That employee is here today, and I will not allow his integrity or mine to be manipulated any further." One board member tried to interrupt. "Ms. Hale, this is inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" she said sharply, "is covering up a crime." The room fell silent. Ethan felt his pulse hammering. "I have evidence," Vivian continued. Security footage, toxicology reports, messages. She glanced at Ethan, and he gave a small nod. He had spent all night helping her compile everything. Threaded messages, timestamps, patterns of behavior the investor had used before. Enough to trigger an investigation, enough to protect her, enough to protect him. Vivian turned back to the camera. We will pursue this legally, publicly, and transparently. Anyone who attempts retaliation will be held accountable. It was a death sentence for the men who tried to control her. And they knew it. The live stream ended in chaos, but at the center of the storm stood Vivian and Ethan, unshaken. Later, alone in her office, she exhaled a trembling breath and whispered, "I thought I was going to lose everything today." Ethan shook his head gently. "You didn't. You just took it back." She smiled, small, exhausted, genuine. "Ethan," she murmured, "I don't know what happens next." He shrugged lightly. "Then we figure it out, one step at a time." For the first time in a very long time, she believed that was possible. And for the first time in even longer, Ethan realized he wasn't just surviving, he was finally living.